So Julian Assange making another statement. He made one earlier on today at about lunchtime, again not taking questions. This is a victory that cannot be denied, he says. He mentioned the Foreign Secretary. Of course, there's been this war of words somewhat between himself and the Foreign Secretary about this UN panel that ruled that the WikiLeaks founder is being arbitrarily detained. He has one view, Philip Hammond has quite another one. So other than that, I don't think we gleaned much more from Julian Assange in his balcony appearance. Hind Hassan has been listening to it there, and you can see the huge throng of people. Hind, did you feel that there was much new from Julian Assange there?
Well, actually, it sounded pretty much similar to what we heard earlier today at the press conference that was being held. What we heard earlier today was that he'd come out and he said that his family had been denied access to him, well, not denied access to him, that he hasn't been able to see his family as much as he'd wanted to. And said the same thing here. Actually, what a lot of people have been saying is that this is actually a very elaborate and impressive publicity stunt by him, because he'd said yesterday that if the United Nations Working Group ruled against him, he was going to come out and expect to be arrested by the British police because he would have exhausted every sort of appeal avenue that he could have taken. If their report came back in his favour, then he would fully expect to have got his passport back and to be able to move freely. Now it turns out that he actually knew that the United Nations Working Group was going to rule in his favour. So why did he say that? Well, if you look around me, you can see the world's media appears to have descended upon Knightsbridge here. We've seen journalists from every different corner of the world has come here to hear what Julian Assange had to say, but what appears to be the case is actually he's got no intention of leaving anytime soon. The United Kingdom has come out and said that they don't intend to change their policy on Julian Assange and that they reject the findings by the United Nations Working Group. And what's really important is Sweden's response to all of this. What does Sweden think? Because of course this is Sweden that issued a European arrest warrant, and it's Sweden that wants to question him on those allegations of sexual abuse. Sweden has said it's going to go out and continue as it was before. So what we've seen today is technically no change in terms of Julian Assange's position, in terms of staying at the Ecuadorian embassy. But what we've seen is he's managed to get the world's media here to hear from the United Nations Working Group, hear from his lawyers, and hear from him.
All right, Hind Hassan, thanks very much for that.
Julian Assange has accused the British government of denying his children a father after a United Nations panel found he's the victim of an arbitrary detention. The WikiLeaks founder also accused the Foreign Secretary of insulting the UN Working Group. Philip Hammond had earlier called the finding frankly ridiculous.
Now, I don't, in some ways, having been involved in the exposure of corruption and war crimes in government for nearly 20 years, it doesn't come as a shock to see the type of injustice you've been in the business of exposing inflicted on yourself. That's part of my work. I am tough, I am hardened by this process, in fact, and I can take it. However, what right does this government, or the US government, or the Swedish government have to deny my children their father for 5.5 years?
Yes!
Without any charges in any country.
We'll talk to our correspondent on the ground live in a moment. Let's take a look, first of all, at how Julian Assange came to be holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy. Until last August, he was wanted for questioning in relation to an allegation of sexual assault during a visit to Sweden in 2010. A European warrant for his arrest was issued. He was granted bail in the UK pending a legal challenge. To avoid possible extradition to the United States over his work with WikiLeaks, Julian Assange applied for political asylum to the Embassy of Ecuador in London. The UK government stationed police officers outside the building until last October to arrest him should he try to leave. Ecuadorian Foreign Minister Ricardo Patealo announced that Ecuador was granting Assange political asylum because of the threat represented by the US secret investigation against him. On Friday, the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention said Mr. Assange had been unlawfully detained, according to his human rights. The Swedish statute of limitations regarding questioning over an allegation of rape expires in 2020, by which time there would be no reason to extradite Mr. Assange to Sweden. So let's go live to the Ecuadorian embassy now and speak to our reporter Hind Hassan. I suppose, Hind, with this latest burst of media attention, people will be asking, is it now high time we saw Julian Assange leaving the embassy?
That's the question that everybody has been saying, and actually there's been a number of people who said that this is a very impressive publicity stunt by Julian Assange, because he had said yesterday that if the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detentions ruled against him, then he would leave and expect to be arrested by British police, because he then would have felt that he'd exhausted every appeal avenue available to him. But he also said that if they ruled in favour of him, then he would fully expect to get his passport back and be allowed to move freely. But it turns out that he already knew what the working group was going to say. He knew that they were going to rule in favour of him, and he said that specifically to get as much media attention as possible, and that is exactly what happened. So we've been here since around 7 o'clock this morning, and everybody has been wondering whether today was the day that he was going to step out. Of course, that's not been the case. He did hold a press conference at the Frontline Club. Of course, he wasn't there in person. He appeared via Skype. And in that press conference, he spoke about how difficult it has been to see his family, how he felt vindicated by the working group's findings today. And he also responded to comments that were made by the Foreign Secretary, Philip Hammond, earlier today. We can have a listen to that now.
Their conclusion is flawed in law. Julian Assange is a fugitive from justice. He's hiding from justice in the Ecuadorian embassy. He can come out onto the pavement anytime he chooses. He's not being detained by us. But he will have to face justice in Sweden if he chooses to do so. And it's right that he should not be able to escape justice. This is frankly a ridiculous finding by the working group, and we reject it.
I have read this morning the comments of UK Foreign Minister Philip Hammond insulting the United Nations, calling a decision which I doubt very much that he's read ridiculous. I find those comments to be beneath the stature that a foreign minister should express in this situation.
So there you have it. The British government says it's not going to change its policy on Julian Assange, and if he was to step outside of the building behind me, they would still arrest him. There's been a bit of confusion as to whether the United Nations rulings are legally binding. Julian Assange's lawyers say they are, but the United Kingdom can't actually be forced to follow through with any findings that the United Nations makes. But this is, earlier we spoke to a representative for the United Nations, and this is what he had to say on this subject.
The working group has never said that he should not face justice for the alleged crimes. But can you allow your justice system to function in the way that it violates human rights? That's what the working group is refusing. That the criminal allegation against him, the working group has no issue about them and doesn't interfere with the domestic criminal justice. And that has to go its own way. But in the course of that process, we cannot afford to violate the fundamental right of a fair trial.
Now, after the press conference by the Frontline Club, we were approached by somebody who called herself a supporter of Julian Assange, and she let us know that he would be appearing on the balcony. There was a pretty dramatic media scrum with everybody trying to get around that balcony to hear what he had to say. He came out, and it was very similar to what he said at the Frontline Club. We heard the clip of him earlier talking about how his children had been denied a father. Didn't take any questions from journalists, that was the end of it, and he walked back into the embassy. We haven't seen him since, and we don't know when the next time we will see him is.
They're down outside the Ecuadorian embassy.